Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Ramesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Ramesh and I met while I was supporting a client transforming their business. And I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Hello everyone and welcome to Strive and Thrive. And on today's episode, I would like to welcome Kim Abbott, who is the founder of Vested Impact. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Ramesh. And hi, everyone listening.
Thank you. So we've invited Kim on this episode. I've known Kim now, and we had this discussion just before, coming up to 10 years now when she first moved from Australia to the UK. Kim and I met in Thales, which is a French multinational company. We worked in innovation. And one of the things Kim and I, for our sins, were responsible for was shaping a very interesting drone application, which maybe we'll get onto at some point. But that was such an interesting experience. And then after that, Kim moved on to set up Vested Impact, which is currently going from strength to strength. I can say she is one of the most driven, interesting and hardworking people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So I think today will be super interesting in learning about Kim's history, experience and what others can learn from that. So Kim, first question first. Tell us a bit about Vested Impact and what it is and what you're trying to achieve in it.
Yeah, so Vested Impact is a data platform. We serve financial services and corporates, and we work in the kind of sustainability and impact space. But it's essentially a data platform that helps companies and financial services to automatically assess and quantify the outward impact that companies or investments or the products and services delivered by those things have on over 150 issues. It can be anything from climate to environment, but also things like social inclusion, housing, e-waste, where it's tech-driven. So we do it by leveraging over 200 million academic papers and around 100 million impact data points, which means we can kind of provide that science-based evidence for what is the impact that, you know, the companies we work with, we invest in, have every day. And how can we then make better decisions about kind of where we put that money and how we ultimately help businesses grow that are genuinely having positive impacts on the planet and society around us. So we've been going for about 6 years, started Vested 6 years ago. And yeah, it's been a pretty long journey, but one that I'm sure we'll talk about. You know, you have many kind of twists and turns and learn things along the way.
Yeah, I've got, all my questions are around Vested. But what I wanted to do first, Kim, before we do that is, so Ramesh can jump in. Can you give a bit of background on your previous work in Rocker Jewelry? Because it sort of is the foundation for some of when I first met you and your kind of entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, so I'm Australian by background, and I'm also an engineer by background. So when I was at university studying engineering, my university actually offered a little semester break to go and help teach English in India. So I went to do that for 1 month. But whilst I was there, I basically realized that I think the problem we were solving was very important, but that we weren't, if you look at a kind of systems change side, there was a kind of core root of the problem that wasn't really being addressed, which was around kind of economic empowerment of women. So in India and also globally, women are one of the most underutilized resources in the world. And we were in these granite quarries on the outskirts of Bangalore in kind of central South India, where they mine granite 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They earn about $1 a day. But the women there, one of the women approached me and kind of said, you come here and you educate our kids, but why doesn't anyone help me? And I realized that if you empower women, kind of families thrive. And if families thrive, villages thrive. And when villages thrive, whole communities and economies thrive. So what I did basically with another student who was there with me at the time, we decided we wanted to start a business to help train up these women on how to run a business and have their own forms of income separate to mining in the quarries. But yeah, it was a very scarcity kind of thing. These communities don't have a lot. They live in there's no running water, no electricity. So we had to figure out how the hell you start a business in that environment. So we came up with a way to take the waste granite dust, which is a byproduct of the mining, to train the women how to make that into other products. It was actually primarily jewelry, which we would then export back to Australia and sell. The women would learn how to run a business. They would also earn a wage, and the excess profits that were made was also reinvested in funding the education of their kids. So I ran Roka while I was still at university, and then whilst I then started my first job at Thales, I continued to run it from Australia, and ultimately ran it for about 4 years. We ended up employing around 9 women across 2 villages and funding the education of around 150 kids, purely from taking, I guess, a waste product and turning it into something useful. But fundamentally, it was about empowering these women with the ability to kind of change their own lives and to have that kind of control and empowerment themselves.
So, such an interesting story, and that sort of builds on your love of entrepreneurship and impact, I think. The other area, and I know you're working quite a lot or engage with, is the UN. Can you give us a bit of an overview of what you do there? And it's such a different perspective, right, from what you've just talked about in India to that kind of UN perspective.
Yeah, I think it's different levels. I think I was quite fortunate, as you mentioned, Mike, about that experience in India. It was my first realization, I think, that not that the charity model was broken, not that what we were doing teaching those kids was not useful, but that there is an incredible force for good in the world that exists in business and doing good business, we would say, So that was my first introduction to it. And then, of course, I graduated uni and I did what most people should do, which is go get a grad job. So I went to a big corporate at Thales, which is where I learned a lot about kind of how big business is done and how corporates work. And then after my time at Thales, I left there and I ended up working for the United Nations. So I was hired by the UN to help lead for them the development of a technical platform to help monitor and assess the impact of their $8 billion peacekeeping operations. And it was a super cool job. I mean, it's an incredibly hard thing, peace, as we see in the world we live in right now. But how do you measure that? How do you not have to say we did 5,000 patrols in Mali, but did those 5,000 patrols actually change anything? Did it make it more peaceful for the communities around there? Have certain things, improved? So that was my job. And I guess its impact at an incredibly different level. When I was in India, you could be very much on the ground with these communities. But then at the UN, you could be sitting in New York at UN headquarters, or I could be sitting here in London staring at a screen of data, but not necessarily in the conflict zone. And it was problems that were interactively so large. How do you stop some of these conflicts that have been going on for 70 years? So yeah, it was a harder thing to fathom, but no less impactful and no less kind of exciting, I think. I was fortunate I had a boss who very much believed you can't help people without understanding them. So I got to travel a lot to these different countries and conflict zones and kind of I spent 3.5 years building that platform with the UN and kind of traveling around the world. But it was a very different scale of a problem and arguably a much more challenging one to solve because it's not just reliant on a good solution. There's politics, there's policy, and there are so many other factors at play as to why, change can or can't happen with institutions of that size.
And do you think, this is how I think when I think of Kim, do you think that UN experience, the Roka experience, the Thales experience, which you both and I talk a lot about, do you think that's helped craft who you have and how you've taken forward Vested Impact?
100%. I mean, sometimes people look at my career and they think those things all look very different. To me, they're actually all the same thing, which is problem solving. Fundamentally, I even became an engineer because I wanted to solve problems. So all I've ever done is solve problems. I've just done them in a different context. With yourself at Thales, we were solving innovation problems Yes, they were for, aerospace or security or, for a corporate, but it was still just problem solving. So I think a lot of what it taught me was different things. I think, like I say, Roka taught me a lot about, the power of business as a force for good and about genuinely listening to the people you're trying to help, because we made many mistakes. And it was fundamentally often because we didn't really listen to the people that this was fundamentally about, that we were serving. I think at Thales, I learned a lot about good engineering, actually, good processes. I learn a lot what not to do sometimes, which is just as valuable. But fundamentally, at both the UN and a big corporate, you learn a lot about how decisions are made, how to drive change, because if you're going to change things in the world, you need to work with the levers of power. And unfortunately, or fortunately, in our current society, those levers of power do sit with big organizations, with big businesses. So it helped me a lot in leading into Vested now, where we are trying to move trillions of dollars of capital into companies that do good, to understand how these big organizations make decisions, how to get things moving, was probably the most important thing I learned from at least those last two experiences at Thales and the UN.
Hey Kim, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, and actually fascinating. You've just done so many different things, and I can absolutely see the way you've described how all of those experiences have kind of been accretive to your experience as a founder. And yeah, the learnings I'm sure continue. Mike, this is actually the very first time we've met, and Mike has told me a little bit about you, and one of the things I found interesting about your backstory with Vested is that I understand that you've had long periods where you've essentially been bootstrapping as a founder. Is that right? Where you haven't, gone in for investment straight away. I'd love to understand why you followed that approach, and how you found it. Has it been an effective approach for you?
Yeah, I will talk about that. I think it comes from, there's different reasons, I guess, to why at Vested we've bootstrapped. Some is out of necessity. Other is out of choice. But I think, and I might actually, I think, Mike, this is something you might have interesting views on too, was when I did Roka, I was a student, we didn't have money. You had to have this scarcity mindset of like, you build with what you have, you move forward with what you have. To do more, you have to generate, money somewhere. So I think that was ingrained in me in the start. I think at Thales, we did a lot on, I know, Mike and I did a lot on kind of agile, lean development, which again is kind of saying, let's do as much as you can with as little as you have, because it de-risks many things, but it sometimes makes you do it better. And I think on my side, so when I started Vested, I absolutely did what I think many founders do. You pull together a pitch deck before you even have a product to some degree, and you start pitching it to investors because you're like, I need money to do this. It was incredibly hard to raise investment. It's incredibly hard to raise investment in the current market. It's hard when you're an underrepresented founder. Sometimes it's even harder when you do run an impact-first business, because some investors don't believe that it's possible to kind of be able to marry up profit and impact. And I disagree, but that is a challenge you often face. So I tried, like many, to raise investment for a long time. But in hindsight, it was kind of, I did get to a point where I decided I liked bootstrapping because it made me more sensible with our decisions. We did make sure we were building the right thing for our clients. What did we actually need to build versus what could we build is very different when you've got lots of money. You kind of go, oh, well, we may as well build that. And I think fundamentally, the one thing I'll emphasize too, that it taught me about bootstrapping was, I would say to any founder, bootstrap as long as you can, because it makes you a better, often a better product, often a better decision maker with, your money. But ultimately then when we did raise investment, so last year we gained investment, because I had spent 4 or 5 years of bootstrapping myself means at that point when you raise investment, you still have so much equity and control in the business, which is very important, particularly when you're an impact-first business. Being able to also say, I still have control as a founder. I still am able to ensure that we stay true to our mission. And a lot of founders give away too much too early by not trying to bootstrap and just taking investment. So it's not been the easiest journey, but yeah, I think there's something to be said. I don't know, Mike, if you've got something to add on that whole agile, lean, build a proof of concept, build an MVP, it actually makes you a better business, and in a way, not having money makes you do it better, was what I found. But I don't know, Mike, if you've got something you want to add there from that.
Yeah, I agree. And Romesh and I have talked about this a number of times, is the ability to do micro tests and really get feedback is so important, and get some insights from what the customers need from your business model validation or even from your technical hypothesis. And I would say whether I work in government or in startups, that kind of approach tends to work better. Otherwise, people tend to follow a vision. And that's always dangerous. And I think if you've got money, or not comfortable money, but you've got an allocation of money that you can do something with, you tend to follow your vision much more than you will follow what the market's telling you, or what the need is, or what works to generate revenue when you suddenly need revenue to keep the business moving and do the things you want to do. I think I see all the time. I think it's a much better approach. But from an accountancy perspective, Romesh, what's your view? You work with a number of these companies. So how do you see this?
Yeah, well, I think it's, financial survival is critical, isn't it, for business? And I mean, all of this completely resonates with my thinking as well, really. I think, firstly, it gives you discipline, doesn't it? It forces you, which you touched on, Kim, it forces you to focus on surviving and utilizing your limited resource in terms of time, in terms of people, in terms of money, in the most effective way. And I think that discipline is a skill which is critical for businesses as they grow, and for leadership to really understand and perform effectively. I think also you talked about equity and control. That's also so important. You mentioned, Kim, about the impact of being an impact business, and how important it is that you have that independence. And I would actually say that makes sense, but also most businesses will have the same kind of concerns, right? If you're a founder of a business, it's your baby, it's your dream, it's your vision, and you want to drive that. As soon as you start giving away big tranches of equity early, and you have to frame it in the sense that you may want to fundraise again later, and not just once, but multiple times. And each time you fundraise, you dilute more and more. So there is that equitable control consideration. And I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have as well, a situation where investors come on board where they kind of want to influence the direction of the business, the vision, the way things are done, the focus and priorities. And in many instances, that's really beneficial, right? Because investors often bring in a lot of experience.
And something on that, Ramesh, just to add to that, someone said to me very early on, and I think it's incredible advice, is it doesn't just matter that you get money, it actually matters more who you get it from. To your point, Ramesh, around you do need, particularly if you're impact, you need values aligned investors, of course. But actually, I think it is harder legally, it is harder to get out of an investor relationship than it is a marriage. So it really does matter. Like, I think you get
a good way to put it.
But it is, right? And you think to yourself, like every founder goes, and I will admit, it is a privilege sometimes to be able to bootstrap, right? A lot of underrepresented founders in that you can't afford to not take a salary. You can't afford. So I will caveat that it is a privilege sometimes to have the ability or freedom to bootstrap. But I also caveat at it's not worth it though to just take any money. it needs to be the right capital from the right people, because otherwise it doesn't matter. Your business is going to end up not where you want it, to your point, Ramesh, and not with you leading it where you'd like it to be. So I think, that part on the who, Ramesh, I think is so key, that a lot of founders, you just think, I'll take the money from anyone. No matter how desperate you are, it's really think carefully about where you get that money from.
Did you have to change anything? Impact business is what you talk about. Did you have to change anything to secure your funding, or did the investors support your strategy of being an impact-led business, and that was your tack that found the right investor?
That I would say that actually, Mike, it's the tack that found the right investor, because I was pitching to some investors who, they had questions around, the commercial model, or whether I had enough. I was so passionate about driving the impact, but they were almost rightfully sometimes questioning, do you have that same passion though about driving profit and return? I think the interesting thing for me was, so we have landed on some phenomenal investors in that they, not only do they, agree with the mission we have. In my articles of association, in my board reporting, I am accountable for our impact metrics at the same degree that I'm accountable for our revenue and our financials and that. And that comes from, and this is why I say I think it came from twofold. I had investors that understood what we're about, but I didn't have to fight too hard to keep that. And I think it's because I found the right investors, which was and I think sometimes, so when I was pitching at that time, I stopped at one point. I said, I give up. I'm not fundraising anymore. I'm just going to knuckle down and we'll just generate revenue and be profitable. And then I got approached for investment, which I think it's a bit of the fairy tale, but you kind of go, if you do good work and you build a good business, the people that recognize that and go, well, damn, we kind of want to be a part of that, and a part of how you are doing it, just eventuated. But I'm very fortunate. My angel investors, as well as our corporate venture firm and our VC that are kind of involved, all of them are values and mission aligned to what we are, which just makes my job so incredibly easy to maintain the core of, I guess, who we are and what we do.
And that's so interesting to hear, right? The fact that you bootstrapped, the fact that you went through all those kind of, disciplinary processes to make sure the business was functioning well, that actually made the business more attractive to investors. And one of the things you said earlier, I've experienced so many times, it's distracting, isn't it, when you're fundraising? It's such a focus for founders and leadership teams to kind of go pitch to investors, when actually, yes, that's important, but you want to drive the business forwards too. You can't do everything. So the fact that you focused on making your business sustainable, not just from the impact side of things, but financially sustainable and financially attractive to investors, made them come to you. And I love that story. And one of the things, that I also really like about what you said, Kim, is that alignment with your investors, right? Just to underline again how important that is, because I think, I've seen where investors haven't been aligned as well as they should have been to the founder and the leadership team, and that could cause so many problems. And as you said, it's a marriage that sometimes you can't get out of. So think very carefully and very hard about that. Mike, have you kind of got any examples of kind of that conflict of interest that can sometimes happen when an investor and a founder team are not aligned?
Yeah, I've seen entrepreneurs who, particularly the strategy, they've got stuck on strategy side. They've had an investor who's been aligned, and they've tried, and maybe the business needs to evolve and pivot, and there's often that disconnect. And what I see is then bad behaviors. Really, one of them is telling them, the other's doing things, and they just sort of misalign. And when you're relying on that funding to keep the business alive, it's such a dangerous territory to be in. And I think one of the things I see is people need to be sure on their value proposition to such a strength that actually then it's a shared decision if you're going to evolve it, rather than this lots of experiments. We've not quite pinned down who our first client is or where we're going to point our businesses. And I think you, for me, Kim, have always had such a strong vision that's probably something you've been waiting for the right people to jump on board. And I think that's powerful. And it touches a question on Jesse. Do you see Vested as a technology-led business, or do you see it as a business sort of user customer led business? And what's your kind of philosophy in that sort of journey?
If I'm honest, I would actually say we're a problem-led business. And I know, every textbook or that under the sun would probably tell you to be a customer-led business. But the history of Vested, in terms of when we started it 6 years ago, we were ahead of the customer and we were ahead of the market, right? We were trying to solve a problem so deep that I knew needed, and I, very strongly felt needed to be solved, which was how do we solve the world's greatest problems? To do that, we need to move about $5 trillion a year towards, poverty, climate change, those things. And the only place you get $5 trillion a year is if you move it from the capital markets. So to me, I was like, and then one of the problems why that money doesn't move when we spoke to banks and that was, well, we don't have data. So I was like, great, we're going to go solve that. The reality was, if we had been customer led, it's a bit like when Henry Ford was probably like, does everyone want a car? And they're like, a car. And they're like, yeah, but my horse is fine. That's probably what we were kind of facing. So if we'd been customer led at the start, we actually probably wouldn't be where we were. However, what we did, because I am an engineer, so you say about being tech-led, probably slightly too tech-led at the start. We then narrowed down into building a phenomenally strong technical solution that then when we went to take to market, there wasn't quite a marry up between the kind of value proposition, what the client needed and what we had. We actually almost needed to peel back features and meet them where they're at. And that's been one of my biggest lessons. I think it has served us incredibly well to be the problem-led, because in our space, in sustainability and impact, there's been a lot of change in the last few years with regulations. Any one of those changes doesn't really impact us because we've solved the problem so deeply that we are so much more kind of impervious to, those kind of a superficial thing we've addressed. But however, I've had to learn a lot the last few years about almost making it a little bit more customer-led, because you kind of, someone said to me once, there was a business recently, they've built an incredible AI solution that's helping people, I guess, optimize your AI models that, once they're broken. But they said the reality is it's like building up the auto shop, the car, when everyone still has a horse and trailer. They don't need to maintain their cars yet. They're not there. And they're going to kill that business, put it on ice and move back to what the customers actually need. So, I think for us, I would say we've been problem-led, need to be slightly more, maybe a little too tech-led, and a learning to be more customer-led. But we're always cautious that, again, if we just stick where the customer's at, we're not really driving systemic change and helping move the market. So it's a balance for us between those.
It's a lovely insight. For me, it's the balance is exactly the right narrative, right? It's that finding the problem, helping people understand.
I thought you were going to tell me it was customer or the when I've done it wrong. So that's good to hear.
No, I'd agree with you. For me, it's that balance. It's recognizing perhaps when you are too technical led or too customer led or even too market driven, right, towards significant change, but you're not making any money. It's kind of that balance is the magic to kind of be unique, but also kind of aligned to become able to bootstrap and sort of survive.
That's so insightful, right? Because, Kim, you talked about listening, and that being really, really important, understanding customer needs, but being able to challenge them and educate them in something new that you're bringing to the table makes complete sense. So that balance, that is quite interesting. Do you think there's a sequence though where you have to firstly do the listening, firstly understand customer needs before you can then, I suppose, branch off and then push back and say, well, hey, how about this?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think it's iterative, Ramesh. Like, I think you can't solve a problem without understanding it and without understanding the people it impacts. So my kind of, I guess, the way with Vesta, when like I said, I wrote on my whiteboard actually one day, literally wrote the sentence, how do you solve the world's biggest problems? This was a tool we used to use at Talos a bit actually, Mike, which was, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by world's biggest problems? And I wrote down, well, actually, I mean poverty, I mean climate and this. What do I mean about solve them? And what's not solving them? And I just literally ideated and broke it down. And then when I landed on, I then decided to pick what part of that problem could I solve with my skills? And that's when I landed on, I really think money should be driven. Everything I could read was telling me data was a problem. And then I basically pulled together, I guess, a bit of a like, what's my idea? And went and spoke to people, to your point, Ramesh. Like, then I always say to a founder, like, when you talk about bootstrapping, you don't need the money you think you need sometimes, in terms of you got a lot you got to learn and figure out before you should build a thing, write a line of code. So then it was a lot of kind of interviewing and talking to people and going, have I got this right? Is that really the problem? And would this really help change it? But then I think what you often find is you then go and build something and then you got to go back and do that again. And it's just a cycle. But I think that's
it's never perfect first time, right? It's that constant learning. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, something that I've definitely seen with businesses sometimes is that they spend too much time kind of leading with the product. They almost fall in love with a product or service, and they spend an awful lot of focus on that, not understanding, the wider.
Yeah, I say to people, fall in love with the problem, but not the product. You need to care about the problem so much that you'll do anything to solve that problem. And it might mean, to your point, Ramesh, it might mean killing that really cool algorithm that we built, because if it doesn't serve the problem we care deeply about solving, then it's kind of should be a no-brainer. But yeah, I think you're right. Don't fall in love with your product, because your clients are always going to not like it, have something wrong with it. But what you need to care about is, are you helping solve the problem?
That's got to be the quote of the discussion so far. Fall in love with the problem and not the product. I think that's absolute gold dust. Brilliant. Thanks, Kim. So listen, you are so focused on impact. You're so passionate about that, and I can really, really feel that. I'm, and Mike as well. We're very much proponents and supporters of, people, planet, as well as profit. What are the biggest challenges that impact businesses face at the moment, from your experience?
I think it is the reality of marrying purpose with profit, because I think you genuinely, I say to people, if I didn't care about, if it wasn't about money, I would have started a charity, right? So it's like, it's okay to admit you are also in it for the money, the profit, the revenue. And if anything, that is what enables you to have more impact. That's the way I always saw it. And what I learned even back to InRoca was, it felt, we kind of as a society have this weird reaction to the idea that anybody should make money from helping people. But what I think is crazier is that we don't seem to have any negative reaction to the fact that companies make billions of dollars from helping no one. So it is okay to be like, the thing that helps us do more impact is that we make more money, and that just enables us to put more in and do more and that. And I think that's the reality. The hardest thing is your own values sometimes going, yes, I have impact metrics, but I have revenue and profit metrics, and this is a business, and my investors do care about making a return. And if anything, the more money we make, the more we do, and the more we help. So it's a hard mental shift to make, but I actually think it is one of the biggest challenges. I meet so many amazing founders who care so deeply about their problem, who know their problem so deeply. They're experts. But I think, your solution's never going to get out there if you can't figure out a way to sell it and get people to use it. And you're never going to be able to do it at the scale you want unless you can kind of wrap a commercial thing on it. So you have to get comfortable with the fact that there will be decisions you make that are sometimes going to be tied to the profit and sometimes tied to the purpose. And that is an unfortunate trade-off, but you'll have to get comfortable making them.
Yeah, that's so well put. I think the way I like to think about it is, they're all so important, all those factors. But if you don't have a financially sustainable business, nothing else works, right? You can't, continually employ people. You can't continually provide the products and services that you're so passionate about. So your ability to impact in that positive way doesn't work. So it's an absolute essential. Of
And
course,
you'd probably
I'm
see that,
a
Ramesh,
finance guy.
like I was going to say, as an FD. But someone
Exactly.
said to me, an advisor said to me one day, and it was quite salient. It was about 2-3 years in, and I was so product driven, tech driven, right? I was so focused on building. I kept saying like it was this amazing product, and I kind of figured if I built a good enough piece of technology, like people would come. But also, I was like, I'm an engineer by background. I wouldn't say I'm a natural, salesperson, marketeer, right? And they were like, I'm sorry, Kim, but you're really going to have to get outside your comfort zone and learn that. And I was like, no, I won't. And they said, you will otherwise have the best solution. You'll go down in history as you built the best thing that nobody ever used. And that was the most heartbreaking thought. I was like, hang on a minute, that could genuinely happen unless I figure out how to wrap a commercial model on this and how to kind of do that. And I think you're right, Ramesh, as an FD, a lot of times the finance person can feel like the bad guy, but they're the honest person saying, what we've built is great, guys, but we can't pay everyone's salary and we can't do this unless we start, getting those things in order. And so I think it's a very salient point to go. Sometimes it's not about the best ideas. It is the ones that can survive and can figure out a sustainable business model.
It's achieving that balance, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. So having had so much experience in building Vested, the Roka jewelry, and all the other diverse experiences that you've had in problem solving, what would you say are your top kind of 3 do's and don'ts for people who want to set up their own business? What have been your biggest learnings?
So I think the first one I kind of covered is be obsessed with the problem, but not the product, I think is an absolute do. I think the second thing, as a founder, you have to get really comfortable and aware of what you are good at and what you're not. And then the third part is ask for help in the things you're not. The only reason I say, a lot of people will say stuff to me, I'm a solo founder, and they'll be like, wow, how hard was it doing it all on your own? And it's a strange question for me to take sometimes, because I think, but I didn't do it on my own. From day zero, I've had an incredible group of mentors, advisors, that to me are as important to where the business has gotten to, as, me and my role in it. So once you figure out, honestly, I knew I didn't quite have sometimes the business or commercial natural tendency. I was going to need some support, mentorship, advice. Once I knew that, I went and found those people, and I actually formally put in place an advisory board very early on, but really it was a group of incredible mentors. So I think that's my 3 do's, because no one person can solve most problems. Actually, you do need help, and you need help for your own sanity. I think my don'ts, again, we may have covered a little, but it is don't. Yeah, I was going to say don't take money, but I think that's the bad message. The message is be very careful. Don't rush into. I think the thing I'd say is don't rush into getting capital, taking investment, or even sometimes it might be don't rush into partnerships on a client side. I think we've probably all 3 of us have had ones that have gone wrong. Is it
choose the right investor at the right time?
Yeah, that's a good way to frame it, Ramesh, I think. Because I think the first thing I said to Mike before we joined this call, understanding what type of capital you need is just as important. Venture capital investment is not for everyone. And I learned that probably far too late. I spent so much time pitching to VCs when I thought, hang on a minute, I'm not building a unicorn. We're building an incredibly big company, but it likely in the market we're in, it's not going to be $1 billion, but it's a perfect company for someone that wants one that's going to be sold and acquired and, for a nice large number. So I think understanding what type of money you need, who you want it from, and then being very intentional about that, Ramesh, I think is a bit of I'd just say don't make rash decisions in the short term that will burn you out in the long term. I don't think there's too many other don'ts, because so much will go wrong and you almost need them to. I think some of the things I'd say, oh, don't do this. It's like, actually, you probably need to do it to learn the lesson and move forward.
Love it. So learn from your mistakes, right?
Yes, I think actually that is a good way to sum it up too, Ramesh. You do need to learn from them, though. You have to be incredibly self-aware when you're a founder to go, that didn't work, but what would I do differently? Not just head in the sand. So learn is a really key word, Ramesh. Yeah.
So Kim, what do you see? Impact is having an evolution at the moment, probably due to America at the moment. What's your view on the market and the trend within impact investment, with the kind of, even purpose as a word is kind of odd at the moment in a lot of corporate organizations. What's your view on how that is going to evolve?
My phrase I would say right now is, we need to look at trend lines, not headlines, because the headlines will tell us, yes, Trump has retracted, the United States has a kind of retracted position on climate, for example, or, there'll be some loud voices screaming about greenwashing and things like that. But the data tells us. So when I've looked at it, it's quite a timely question. I have a board meeting next week where I'm briefing my board on the market. But when we look at the actual data, I think three things is really interesting in this space. And I am talking a little bit more around kind of sustainable finance. But we have seen, yes, there has been a bit of a change in language and a bit of a drop in corporates and companies kind of going, oh, hang on a minute, we're going to be careful. We have seen the bond market, which is basically development finance, and that has had its largest quarter on record. More money is going into helping emerging markets, helping solve social, ocean, climate, all of that. You're actually seeing more money go that way than it ever has. And the interesting side, I was talking to a gentleman from a consumer investing side. Consumers, Morgan Stanley just did a survey this quarter from January to March, asking thousands of investors, what are they going to do with their money? And all of them are actually doubling down and doing more. I think it was only 3% of investors actually said they were going to pull back from their sustainable investing. And what we're seeing, which I think is quite remarkable, Europe has always led the market in sustainability. It always has. But there's a new leader, according to that data, which is Asia. APAC has come flying through as the region where they have the most amount of investors that care. They have, a large amount of high net worth individuals who care. So actually, I think it's, that's what I would often say to people is, you don't need to listen sometimes to all the noise. You need to look at what's actually happening and what's being seen. I'm feeling pretty good. I would say if you're a purpose-driven business, and maybe if you're in the United States, it might be challenging if you're trying to work with government or even some large corporates that are aligned with the government. But what we're seeing from most everyday people and, even the financial markets is not as dire as it would impose. And I think fundamentally we say as a team, like, climate, the problem's not going away. So we might choose to stick our head in the sand around it for a bit, but the problem will always be there and they will have to address it at some point.
And I guess that's right, top-down finance, but then there's also the employee experience, right? And and I think consumer behavior, I think, is driving this as much as probably strategic direction as well. So this kind of noise, as you talk about it at the moment, doesn't necessarily fundamentally change the long term.
No, I like what you said about employees, though, Mike, too, because I did speak to a very, very large global corporation a couple of weeks ago when I was in Washington. And they were aware that they can't change their D&I commitments and that, because they're like, our staff won't stand for it. Like, it's not who we are. And I thought they care a lot, to your point about when I said about consumers and investors. You're right. The companies we work for, we can vote with our feet. So they were very concerned that actually if they did change anything, they would see staff leave. And I just thought, we don't realize sometimes, we look at the power these big institutions or governments or corporations have. But we, the people, I guess, have a lot of power. And, even as employees, you have a lot of power to drive what you think your employer, should be advocating for.
Yeah, good. That's interesting. Really interesting. What's next for Kim then over the next few years? Where are you going to take Vested? What's your kind of plans? What's your next big project that you've got in the background that you can tell us?
So I think Vested. So as I mentioned, last year we secured some investment. So we're on I guess you would call it our scale up journey. So yeah, as a reminder before, we're a data platform that helps automatically assess and quantify the impact that companies have. So last year we did a partnership with MasterCard Strive, where we helped assess the impact of over 2 million small businesses globally. Which kind of hasn't been done before. People don't have the impact that says, what businesses help, what SDGs, how much and where. We're doing a lot of work at the moment with development finance institutions, some of the largest banks in the world. So for us, it's really, how do we do more of that? How do I think my thing at the moment is sustainability, social investing, social impacts is still seen as a little bit on the side, particularly in financial institutions. I think the thing we're working on is, how do you mainstream so you have risk, return, and impact, even in the core of an asset management bank? It doesn't have to be in the social finance team. It can be in the core. And I do believe making the tech and data as easy to access as they can access their Bloomberg terminal is really important. So for us, we are looking at things like partnerships. I think that's the one thing I'd also say in the impact space is you don't have to do it alone, and you probably shouldn't. Actually, in our sense, we realized we have an incredibly good data set in what we do, but there is a wealth of other data that a bank might need. And we shouldn't say, well, we're over here. We should say, yeah, we'll join the party and put it in with everything else you need to make it easier for the user. But I think it helps mainstream it. So so there's a lot of us growing the team, growing what we currently do, and we're really looking a lot at emerging markets as well. To us, I think that's just an ethical and important thing that we don't forget. There's some incredible businesses, and there's a credible amount of impact that can be had on regions that people have often said there's no data, and we have a hell of a lot of data on some of those areas, and we're really keen to kind of put it to use and have people use it to drive impact.
Romesh, have you got any other questions?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's amazing in terms of the data, Kim, that Vested is kind of pulling together. How does it work practically then? Is it allowing, can you tell us a little bit more practically how it might work for, let's say, do you serve smaller businesses as well as larger businesses?
We do. And that was the work we did with MasterCard last year. And a credit to them. We've always served large financial institutions to help them kind of screen, I guess, and do their due diligence on if they were going to invest in, your company. Does it truly have an impact where you might claim it does? Or does it have any negative impacts they should know about socially, all that? And then MasterCard recognized that actually that data is very powerful in the hands of the actual businesses themselves, right? If you understood your impact better, you would know how to mitigate your negative impacts and maybe how to expand and maybe gain access to impact investors, and that if you could prove to them your other ones. So how it works in a very simple sense is we pull in information about the company. It might be provided to us by the SME or by the investor, or sometimes we buy it from openly available data sources. We have a system that identifies what are the underlying products, services, and activities you do. Where do you do them? Because the where is really important for impact. And then how much of it you do, a little bit about your financials. And then fundamentally, the system will then leverage 200 million academic papers to understand for each of those products, services, and activities, what are the things it positively impacts, negatively impacts based on science. Not our opinion, based on 200 million academic papers that says, yeah, we know manufacturing mobile phones has a negative impact on e-waste, right? But we know it has positive impacts on access to affordable internet. Tick. So it does that. And then the second part we do is to then quantify the degree of that impact. So if we know how many phones you produce or how big you are, We know what it impacts, and we can pull in data. Then we pull on over 100 million data points on how many people have access to a phone, how many people need access. So are you really moving a needle on a problem? Maybe on the e-waste side, it'll be, well, you might produce that e-waste in Germany and the UK, but actually in Germany, it's recycled really well. So it's actually not as bad a negative impact as you would think. And that's why all that data and the where helps you to put it into the context to say, this is the impact you have based on the products and services you deliver in the places that you are doing them. And then it outputs that into, a heap of reports with all that information for the company or the investor. And it takes about 20 seconds to run through that whole process. That's why we're able to do millions and thousands on demand. And it's quite valuable to small businesses because you don't have the time or the expertise to go and search for all that stuff. When a company says to you, we need you to prove to us, in your procurement this, they can come to our site. They can go and just self-generate their own report to kind of help them meet those needs and provide that evidence, because so many of them do incredible things. They just, it's a bit of a reporting burden for them to go and find all that. It's
a really powerful solution, what I'm hearing, Kim, because I've, been on the side of, those types of businesses where you're trying to understand, well, how do we know the impact of supply chain? How do we verify what our suppliers might be telling us? We might have suppliers from the Far East, and they may not even come back to us at all with answers to those questions. So there's a kind of lack of information as well as a verification of what we do have. And frankly, it's intimidating for growing businesses, isn't it? Because you don't want to miss something. You don't want to be accused of misleading people with information. So it's great that you've got a simple solution which essentially can be a source of truth and a verification. Do you I've got a few businesses that I work with that are going through the B Corp process at the moment. Is there there's an obvious kind of synergy with that kind of process as well, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of regulations in the world now, right? And like we say, onboarding even for procurement for a large corporate, that requires you to evidence now, what are your impacts on wastewater emissions? We always, and this is what I talked about a little about, sometimes you shouldn't try and stand alone. We're not here to create a new methodology that counters B Corp. It's like you're going to need this kind of information in many different places. So you can come and get it and then use it over there. You might use it for your onboarding as a vendor with a large corporate. You might use it in your pitch to investors as evidence. And we've tried to build it like that. When I say about deeply solving a problem, we at its core tried to build the best approaches to how do you truly measure impact, so that you can just kind of then say, well, the CSRD regulation in Europe, which says you need to understand your material impacts. We went, oh, great. That's what we do. And you can use your data there. So, for us, I think we try to really be the enabler for a lot of those regulations, standards, processes, to kind of say more people should do it, but sometimes it needs to be made easier, to provide some independent evidence too. Dare I say it, not just what they claim, but what they can actually show, to your point about verification.
And do you identify any insights off the back of this, Kim, of good practice? So if strategically boards are going, what can we do to have a better impact? Are there things like more localization or distributed workforces, or are there trends that you see as better for impact assessment at the strategic level?
Yeah. It's quite nuanced to where, obviously, because different countries have different issues. So if you have a company that extracts a lot of water for your manufacturing, you're based in Jordan as opposed to the UK, very different. What matters that you should be doing where. But what I would say though, Mike, I think largely, the things that often move the needle, obviously, it's always your products and services. It doesn't matter. Like, we don't actually look a lot internally when you talk about a B Corp. We don't look internally a lot at things like, do you pay your staff well in that? We're looking at fundamentally as a business, what you deliver outwardly to the world. What is the impact that has? Because we find that moves the needle the most. What you do, who you do it for, massive difference, right? It's one thing to offer loans. It's another thing to offer loans to small businesses. It's even another thing to add loans to smallholder farmers, and actually if they happen to be women even. So I think it matters what you are physically doing as a business, whom you do it for. And I think the whom can wrap into the where, because we see some great businesses where you say what you do is phenomenal, but actually if you delivered that in a market with higher need, take it to sub-Saharan Africa or something, even bigger impact. And they almost factor that in to then their expansion plans, where they say, well, yeah, where it was a great German startup, and they said, well, yeah, we're concentrated here, we're going to get it right here, but good for us to know that if we want to have the most impact, you would have to model that, I think, Ramesh, against what's the market size business-wise. But impact-wise, it was very clear to them that there is a high need for this solution. If we went here, here, and here, it could really drive some big impact. So that's the kind of data we see sometimes at that macro level when we kind of go, wow, there's a lot of companies exposed to, kind of negative energy use things and that. But what are the ones that are having positive impacts doing? We look at that quite a bit.
But and you often talk about female founders and entrepreneurship for those less able. What's your to opportunities? What's your view on the kind of what would you like to see to support those kind of individuals be put in place, and kind of would be there's a vision.
I think for underrepresented. I've talked so much about bootstrapping, but I would just say, underrepresented founders need funding. They're over-mentored, underfunded.
Interesting.
And unfortunately, as I said about bootstrapping, it can come from a position of privilege. I was privileged to bootstrap because I had worked in a corporate with yourself, Mike, then I worked at the UN. I had enough in my savings, right, that I could afford the fact that I wasn't generating a revenue from my business whilst I bootstrapped. A lot of underrepresented founders cannot take that risk. And that is where I think very early stage capital for underrepresented founders is incredibly important. And organizations like Impact Shakers do that really well. They give small amounts of money in incredibly early stage because they recognize that you can't even afford to take the risk. They say, oh, it's so brave to do a startup. And I think I wasn't that brave. I had money, I had things, and I think there are other founders where they often, I think the saying is like the cure for cancer could be sitting in the mind of a child in a slum in Africa. And it's like we do need to recognize though that particularly underrepresented female founders and that sometimes don't have the same starting base as others as well.
Thank you very much, Kim. Ramesh, anything you'd like to close with before we come to an end?
No, it's been absolutely brilliant, actually. Kim, one thing Mike and I are working on this kind of series of discussions is actually to kind of come in with kind of counter views as well, to kind of push back a little bit. But personally, I found that I'm so aligned with your thoughts and values that's been basically impossible. But I've really enjoyed all of your thoughts and hearing about your experiences, and really very well done on what you've achieved at Vested. So thank you. And Mike, unless you have anything else to add.
I had a nice summary to sum up, Kim, but I'm not going to do it because what I think I'm going to say is fall in love with the problem, I think, is my takeaway for today. And I think for me, that's the one people mustn't forget, because you do get lost in your world of entrepreneurship sometimes, and just remembering the problem is really important.
It is a brilliant soundbite. So Kim, thank you again so much for your time and for your valuable insights. It's been a genuine pleasure. I'd like to thank everyone very much for listening or watching. We hope that you enjoyed this discussion as much as we have. Strive and Thrive is a regular series of discussions for entrepreneurs and business leaders. We've got a great pipeline of interesting people like Kim to share their insights with you. Our next session will be in a few weeks, and we'll share more details on that very soon. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd be super grateful if you could like, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. And we will be soon available across all the podcast formats. A big thanks finally to Mike and the rest of the Strive and Thrive team who've made this all possible. See you all soon.
Thank you for listening to strive and thrive.